Hello, my name is Alexandra Gorlizki. I am an artist based in Brooklyn, New York, and I've been kindly invited by Sarmaya to talk about my work with Indian miniature paintings, and particularly in relation to the film and video work I produce with filmmaker and composer Richard Coldman. This is my studio in Dumbo, Brooklyn, and it's a workspace, but it's also a repository of drawings and sculptures and found objects that have been accumulated over the last 18 years or so. Much of the material relates to my work with traditional craft techniques in Pakistan and mostly in India, where I've travelled over the last 25 years or so. I've been interested in finding ways to apply these very specialised skills to some of my own designs and imagery, and I've commissioned embroiderers and knitters and forgers in Peshawar, and then in India and Rajasthan I've worked with shoemakers, spectacle repairers, carpet weavers, sandcasters, photo tinters, sign painters, stone carvers and so on. The most long-standing and the most significant of these working relationships has been with master miniature painter Riaz, who's based in Jaipur in Rajasthan. When I met Riaz, he was in his early 20s and he was already an incredibly gifted painter. Like most miniature painters in Jaipur, nearly all his work was really based on copying copies of traditional and historic Indian miniature paintings. The tourist market, commercially, it really sustains the Indian miniature painting tradition, but paradoxically it also keeps it very static because there's no incentive to come up with new imagery or really to be creative. My focus was really on introducing new visual forms, new iconography to a tradition that had basically been fairly consistent since the Mughal period. So I established a studio with Riaz in 1996 in the Muslim quarter of the old city in Jaipur. My role was really in kind of conceptualizing and designing, so all the narratives, the placement, the colors, the patterns, all the formal aspects of the artwork was really kind of coming from my end. For Riaz, his real focus was on technique, and he really wants to achieve the most meticulous detail possible. And watching Riaz paint it's quite a breathtaking thing, because the level of concentration and the finesse and the delicacy to achieve these really fine lines is quite a thing to see. Riaz uses basically the same techniques that have been used for hundreds of years, so it's the same kind of natural stone colours, ground down pigments, we add gouaches as well, and then real gold, the single hair tip brushes, burnishing stones. All that is very much part of the tradition, but the iconography is something quite new. Riaz and I either work directly when I'm in the studio in Jaipur, or the work gets physically sent back and forth between his studio and mine in Brooklyn, and that can go on for 2, 3, 4 years. The atelier or workshop has really grown over the last 2 decades or so, so there are now anywhere between 6 to 10 other artists, and it's not uncommon that there might be 2 or 3, 4 artists working on the same painting. Someone will be grinding the colours and blocking them in, someone else might be doing the borders and geometric patterns, and then Riaz will usually focus on the finest details. Much of the work we've produced over the years still maintains a very strong kinship with the historical source from which it has inspired it. So it might look at first glance like it's a traditional or historical miniature, but there's invariably some kind of contemporary twist on the work. New elements from my drawings have been incorporated into quite historical figures, and those historical ones might range from very different schools of Indian or Persian miniature painting. Apart from introducing new iconography to Indian miniatures, I've really been interested also in breaking it out of the picture plane. So I've designed fabrics and wallpapers and carpets and so on over the years. But more recently I've become interested in finding ways of animating the work and either animating the imagery either for screen or to be projected. So I've been very fortunate to work with Richard Coldman, who's an amazingly talented filmmaker and composer, and he's based in Poland.
Hello, my name's Richard Coldman and I make films and compose music. I live in the mountains of southwestern Poland, close to the borders with Czech Republic and Germany. Alexandra and I have been working together over a 20-year period, starting in year 2000 when we were in India together, filming him visiting his various collaborators. Alexander sends me digital stills of his works, some of them narrative, some of them abstract. The narrative works could be populated with all sorts of characters: humans, animals, deities, devils. My intent with those is to take the viewer's eyes for a walk through the painting. So I may start off on an intriguing detail and then move to another detail and then on to another detail, and eventually I will step back with the viewer to take in the overall composition. In 2007 we were invited to enter a piece for a TV festival, an arts TV festival here in Poland. And at that time I was working with the god of rostrum camera work, Ken Morse. And he very kindly filmed a series of paintings of Alexander's. And I sat and watched him working because he is absolutely the master cameraman for paintings. And the time I spent with him in his studio was a wonderful learning period for me. So miniatures, 9 intimate shows for television, was shot by Ken.
In 2015 I had an exhibition at the Crow Collection in Dallas, and they commissioned a video that incorporated some of the paintings that were being exhibited in the exhibition, and that project happily rekindled a very significant collaboration with Richard.
When I worked on variable dimensions for Crow Collections in 2015, my intent was to simulate in some way Ken's fantastic rostrum camera work, but of course I was working in the virtual world through the computer. It's rather different. In my efforts to simulate his approach, I discovered all kinds of new ways of doing things, which has actually opened out into many, many different and novel ways of animating visual art on a screen.
In 2016, I was in a show at Javeri Contemporary, and they commissioned another video piece for the show called Thinking Tantra, which travelled from Mumbai to London and then the southwest of England.
The work for Thinking Tantra was a series of non-figurative pieces, and they were layered, so individual elements could be moved around across textured backgrounds, and there could be depth and changes of plane. we have layered files where Alexandra's cut out various elements from an image. And then I get to play around with those, so I may have different layers moving on top of one another. Bottom background might be moving in one way and top layers might be moving in another. When I look at the image that I'm working on, I may get a feeling straight away for how I want to music the thing. So in this case, I had a feeling for something in 13/4 or 13/8, and I just wanted it to be slightly lumbering and peculiar in its rhythmic feel. So I might sit down at Logic and I may lay down a bass line and put some layers over the top of that. Sometimes an image may suggest a particular instrument to me. I was working on a painting that had a little guy holding a pink bowed stringed instrument of some kind. In that particular case, I used a sampled erhu because the image suggested a bowed stringed instrument and I liked the sound of it. And so I might float an instrument like that, a sampled acoustic instrument, over the top of a bass line. Or I might create a bed of sound. It might be environmental sound, could be jungle sounds, could be bird song. I use quite a lot of bird song. As a filmmaker, I've worked with a lot of different types of artists, choreographers, musicians, composers.
In his earlier years, though most of his professional work was really directed to broadcast TV, his main passion was filming dance. I think that focus on movement and rhythm and musicality has really influenced the work we do together.
We started off making 4x3 images very much in the shape of a conventional television, as they were then, standard definition televisions. And then we moved into 16:9 widescreen. Actually, in advance of high definition television, we were making widescreen images. And then we started to make much more unconventional shapes, 1x1 or 7x1. We're working on a piece at the moment which will be projected onto a horizontal surface 10 meters long by 1.5 meters wide. The viewers will be looking up at it like that. So that obviously has no top, no bottom. It can be looked at from any different angle. So it's a very, very different way of composing an image, and a very different way of deciding how to create movement within the image area.
What I really appreciate about working with Richard is his kind of intuitive and playful approach. It's interesting for me, though, that though we know each other very well and we've worked together a lot, I'm always still quite surprised by what comes out of the edit suite. I'm really fortunate to work with these very gifted artists, Richard and Riaz in the team. It's really kind of developed a network of creative communication between studios in New York and in Jaipur and in Poland.